2 years married without a touch, until the millionaire finally claimed his wife completely. The alarm clock blared at 5:30 in the morning, just as it had every day for the past 2 years. Danielle Stewart slowly opened her eyes, staring at the ceiling of the bedroom she shared with a stranger. Next to her, Edward Stewart slept soundly, his back turned to her, as if even unconsciously rejecting her presence. She got up carefully, tiptoeing across the cold travertine marble floor. The mansion in Greenwich was a mausoleum of luxury and silence, where every step echoed as a reminder of her solitude. In the gourmet kitchen, Danielle prepared her solitary coffee. 6 o'clock. Always 6 o'clock. Because at 6:15, Edward would come down for his own coffee, and they had a tacit agreement not to cross paths more than strictly necessary. "Good morning, Mrs. Stewart," murmured Connie, the housekeeper, entering the kitchen in her impeccably white uniform. "Good morning, Connie," Danielle replied, forcing a smile. Sometimes those were the only words she spoke aloud all day. Danielle looked out the panoramic window that overlooked the perfect garden, where every rosebush was mathematically aligned. It was beautiful but cold. Like everything in this house, like her marriage, 2 years, 73,000 hours of forced coexistence, and they had exchanged maybe 50 words in all that time. "Good morning. Good night. Thank you. Excuse me." Polite phrases between well-mannered strangers. The sound of Edward's footsteps on the floor above made her heart clench. 6:10, 5 minutes for her to disappear before he came down. Danielle grabbed her cup and quickly went up to the office on the second floor, where she would spend the day translating documents for multinational corporations. A freelance job that kept her busy and, above all, away from him. When she heard the garage door close, Edward leaving for another day at the helm of Stewart Holdings, Danielle finally relaxed her shoulders. Another day of forced peace had begun, but neither she nor Edward could imagine that this 2-year routine was about to be completely destroyed by a simple request that would change everything forever. It was 7 in the evening when Danielle heard Edward's Porsche entering the garage. She quickly closed her laptop and prepared for another night of solitary dinner when she heard something unprecedented, footsteps coming up the stairs toward the office. 3 gentle knocks on the door made her heart race. In 2 years, Edward had never come up to the office. "Danielle?" His voice sounded different, hesitant. "Come in," she replied, trying to hide her nervousness. Edward opened the door slowly. At 32, he was undeniably handsome, perfectly styled brown hair, almond-shaped eyes that rarely met hers, an imposing stature that filled any room. He was wearing a navy blue Hugo Boss suit that accentuated his broad shoulders, but there was something different about his posture. His hands trembled slightly. I need to talk to you," he said, unable to look at her directly. Danielle felt her breath catch. Was it about a divorce? Had he finally decided to end this charade? "Of course," she murmured, closing her laptop completely. Edward entered the office, his hands in his trouser pockets. The room suddenly seemed too small for both of them. "Tomorrow night there's an important event at the Plaza Hotel. International investors interested in our real estate projects." He paused, running a hand through his hair. I need you to accompany me." The words came out quickly, as if he wanted to get rid of them as soon as possible. Danielle blinked several times, processing what she had heard. In 2 years of marriage, this was undoubtedly the longest conversation they had ever had. "You want me to go with you? To New York?" she asked incredulously. "It's important for the company. These investors value family stability. A married man conveys more confidence." Edward finally looked her in the eyes. "It's just one event, one night." Danielle felt a mix of anger and curiosity. After 2 years of being treated as if she were invisible, was she suddenly useful now? "And why should I accept?" The question came out more acidic than she intended. For the first time, Edward seemed genuinely surprised by a reaction from her. His eyes widened slightly. Well, we're husband and wife," he said, as if that explained everything. "On paper," Danielle replied, getting up from her chair. "Only on paper, Edward. You've ignored me for 2 years. You treat me as if I'm a ghost in this house, and now you need a trophy wife to impress investors." The silence that followed was different from their usual silences. This one was loaded with tension, with words unsaid for years. "We'll fly with me tomorrow at 3 in the afternoon, he finally said, returning to his executive voice. "The event starts at 8. We'll be back the next morning." Danielle watched him head for the door, but something made her speak. "Edward." He stopped, without turning around. "Next time you need me as an accessory, at least have the courtesy to ask, instead of just inform." She saw his shoulders tense. For a moment, she thought he was going to say something, but Edward simply left, leaving behind only the subtle scent of his Hugo Boss cologne and a completely confused Danielle. For the first time in 2 years, she was sure that something fundamental was about to change. The question was, for better or for worse? The next morning, Danielle woke up with the strange feeling that she had dreamed the previous night's conversation, but the note on the nightstand, written in Edward's impeccable handwriting, confirmed that it had all been real. The car will pick you up at 2 p.m. Dress elegantly. E.S. She held the paper between her fingers, analyzing every word. Even in a note, Edward maintained cold formality. Dress elegantly, as if she were an employee receiving dress code instructions. Danielle opened the walk-in closet that occupied an entire wall of the bedroom. Expensive clothes hung in chromatic order, wedding gifts from her mother-in-law that she rarely wore. After all, who was she dressing up for when she lived like a ghost? Her fingers glided over the luxurious fabrics until she found a dress she had been given for her 26th birthday 3 months ago. Edward hadn't even remembered the date, but Margaret Stewart, her mother-in-law, had sent a box from Saks Fifth Avenue with a navy blue Italian silk dress. Perfect, Danielle murmured, taking the dress off the hanger. As she took a long bath in the marble tub, she let her mind wander. Why had Edward asked her to go with him now? In 2 years, he had attended dozens of corporate events alone. What had changed? At exactly 2 in the afternoon, a black Mercedes pulled up in front of the mansion. The driver, a uniformed middle-aged man, got out to open the door for her. "Mrs. Stewart, I'm Carl. I'm here to take you to the airport." Danielle took a deep breath. She felt like an actress about to go on stage for a role she hadn't rehearsed. At Teterboro Airport, she was taken directly to the executive aviation hangar. The Stewart Holdings private jet gleamed under the afternoon sun, as imposing and intimidating as everything in the Stewart's life. Edward was already on board, focused on his laptop, wearing a charcoal grey suit that brought out his eyes. When she entered the aircraft, he looked up for just a second before returning to the screen. "Good afternoon," Danielle said, settling into the beige leather seat across from his. "Good afternoon." The reply was automatic, without him looking up again. During the 40-minute flight to New York City, they didn't exchange a single word. Danielle watched the clouds outside the window while Edward typed furiously. The only sound was the soft hum of the engines and the constant click-click of the keys. Upon landing, Danielle realized her hands were sweating. It wasn't nervousness about the event. It was the tension of being so close to Edward after 2 years of carefully maintained distance. "The car will take us directly to the hotel," Edward said, closing his laptop. "You have an hour to get ready before the event." "An hour is enough," Danielle replied, surprised by the firm tone of her own voice. When they got out of the plane together, Danielle noticed something she hadn't expected. Some people at the airport were watching them. An attractive couple, he clearly a successful businessman, she elegant and mysterious. For the first time in 2 years, Danielle saw herself through the eyes of strangers, and she didn't like the farce they were putting on. In the car on the way to the Plaza Hotel, she made a decision. If Edward wanted her to play the part of the perfect wife, she would. But this time, it would be on her own terms. "Edward," she said, breaking the heavy silence inside the Mercedes. "Yes? If I'm going to be your wife tonight, I need to know who I'm talking to. Who are these investors? What exactly is this project?" Edward looked at her as if she had grown a second head. In 2 years, Danielle had never shown interest in his business. "They're Europeans, mainly Germans and Dutch. They want to invest in resorts and residential complexes on the Spanish coast." He paused, studying her face. "Why are you interested?" Danielle smiled, the first genuine smile she had given in months. "Because, unlike what you think, I'm not just an adornment. I have a degree in business administration from NYU. I'm fluent in English and Portuguese, and I worked as a consultant for multinationals before—" She paused meaningfully. "Before I became invisible." The silence that followed was different from all the others. Edward watched her with an expression Danielle couldn't decipher. Surprise, interest, or just irritation at her stepping out of the silent wife script? "I didn't know that," was all he said. "There's a lot you don't know about me, Edward. 2 years of marriage, and you've never bothered to ask who I really am." The Mercedes stopped in front of the iconic Plaza Hotel. Uniformed doorman approached to open the doors. Danielle took a deep breath, adjusted her navy blue dress, and prepared for the first night in 2 years that she wouldn't just be the invisible Mrs. Stewart. Tonight, She would be Danielle, and something told her Edward wasn't prepared for that. The ballroom at the Plaza Hotel was impeccable. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light over the setting, decorated with white orchids and scented candles. Businessmen in suits and women in evening gowns circulated with glasses of Dom Perignon champagne, speaking in various languages about multi-million-dollar deals. Danielle entered the ballroom with Edward, feeling all eyes converge on them. Her navy blue Italian silk dress discreetly hugged her curves, while her brown hair fell in soft waves over her shoulders. She felt beautiful for the first time in years. "Edward, what a pleasure to see you." A tall, grey-haired man approached with a warm smile. "And this must be your wife. Klaus, allow me to introduce Danielle, my wife," Edward said, placing a hand lightly on her lower back. The touch, even formal, made Danielle's hair stand on end. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Danielle," Klaus said in perfect English. "I'm Klaus Weber, from Weber Development Group." "The pleasure is mine, Mr. Weber," Danielle replied in the same language, extending her hand elegantly. "I've heard great things about your sustainable projects in the Netherlands." Klaus's eyes lit up. "You follow the European real estate market?" "Professionally, yes. I worked as a consultant for several international companies before." Danielle cast a meaningful glance at Edward. "Before I concentrated on other projects." Edward watched her with an expression he had never seen before. Surprise? Admiration? Before she could analyze it better, another group joined the conversation. For an hour, Danielle circulated the ballroom with Edward, conversing fluently in English and Portuguese with the investors. She discussed market trends, sustainability in construction, and growth opportunities with a knowledge that impressed everyone, including her own husband. "For your wife is very intelligent," a German businesswoman commented to Edward, while Danielle conversed in Portuguese with a group of investors from Rio de Janeiro. "You're a lucky man." Edward followed the woman's gaze to Danielle, who was gesticulating animatedly, explaining something about the Brazilian market. Her eyes shone in a way he had never noticed, or maybe he had never really looked. "Yes," he murmured. "I am." It was almost 10 in the evening when Danielle headed to the bar to order some water. She felt confident for the first time in years when a male voice surprised her. "Excuse me, aren't you Danielle Costa?" She turned and found a dark-haired man of about 35, wearing an elegant suit and smiling warmly. "I'm Daniela Costa now," she corrected politely. "And you are?" "Robert Miller. We were in the same class in college, remember?" "I sat 2 rows behind you in international markets class." The memory came back instantly. Robert Miller, the brilliant student who always asked smart questions during class. He was now more mature, more confident, but the smile was the same. "Of course, Robert, how are you?" Danielle felt genuine joy, something she hadn't experienced in a long time. "Very well. I have an international trade consulting company here in New York. And you?" "Still in the sector. I work freelance, mainly with translations and occasional consulting," Danielle admitted, feeling slightly embarrassed. "What a waste," Robert said, shaking his head. "You were one of the best students in the class. With your experience in international markets, you could be in charge of any multinational." Before Danielle could respond, she felt a familiar presence behind her. Edward approached, his posture more rigid than usual. "Danielle," he said in a tone she couldn't identify. "Edward, this is Robert Miller, a college classmate. Robert, my husband, Edward Stewart." The two men greeted each other formally, but Danielle noticed a subtle tension in the air. "Robert was telling me about his international consulting company," Danielle said, trying to soften the atmosphere. "How interesting," Edward replied, but his tone suggested the opposite. "Actually," Robert said, addressing Danielle directly, "I'm expanding the company and looking for someone with your profile. How about we have dinner tomorrow at the Per Se restaurant to talk better? I have a proposal that might interest you." The silence that followed was loaded with tension. Danielle felt Edward's gaze burning her skin, but there was something about Robert's invitation that intrigued her. An opportunity to be professionally valued after years of invisibility. "Guys," she began, but Edward interrupted her. "We're going back to Greenwich early tomorrow morning," he said, his voice controlled but firm. "What a shame," Robert said, but his eyes remained fixed on Danielle. "Then maybe in Greenwich. Do you have my card?" When Robert walked away after exchanging contact information with Danielle, she realized that Edward was different. His fists were clenched, and there was something in his eyes that she had never seen before. Jealousy. "Ready to go?" Edward asked, his voice more abrupt than usual. Danielle followed him to the elevator in silence, but her mind was racing. In one night, she had rediscovered who she really was. Smart, capable, interesting. And for the first time in 2 years, someone, actually several people, had truly seen her. The question was, had Edward seen her too? And if so, what was he going to do about it? In the elevator on the way to the room, the silence between Danielle and Edward was deafening. She watched the numbers going up on the digital screen while feeling the weight of his gaze on her. When the doors opened on the 12th floor, Edward got out first with determined steps. "We have separate rooms," he said dryly, handing her a key card. "We leave at 8 in the morning." Danielle took the card, her fingers briefly brushing against his. "Edward, are you okay?" He stopped in front of the door to room 1205 without looking at her. "Why wouldn't I be? You're different since I spoke to Robert." "I don't know what you're talking about." Edward slid the card into the lock harder than necessary. "Good night, Danielle." But something in his tone made Danielle take a step forward. For the first time in 2 years, she wasn't just going to accept being dismissed. "We need to talk." "There's nothing to talk about." "Yes, there is." Danielle surprised herself with the firmness of her voice. "You brought me here to play the part of the perfect wife, and that's exactly what I did. I talked to your investors, impressed them with my knowledge, was the partner you wanted me to be." Edward finally turned to her, his almond-shaped eyes gleaming with an emotion she couldn't name. "And so you were," he said, his voice low and controlled. "Oh, you did very well. Then why are you acting as if I did something wrong?" "You didn't do anything wrong." Edward ran a hand through his hair, messing up his perfect hairstyle. "Absolutely nothing." Danielle studied his face, looking for clues. There was something in the way his shoulders were tense, in the way he avoided looking at her directly. "You're jealous," she said, the revelation coming out like a question. Edward's eyes widened. Don't be ridiculous." "Yes, you are. You're jealous of Robert. Why would I be jealous of a complete stranger?" "Because he saw me." The words came out of Danielle with a raw sincerity that surprised them both. "For the first time in 2 years, someone looked at me and saw who I really am. Not just the invisible Mrs. Stewart, but Danielle, the person I am beneath this expensive dress and this wedding ring." Edward looked at her in silence. In the quiet hotel hallway, she could hear her own heart beating. "And you didn't like it," she continued, taking a step toward him. "You didn't like seeing other men interested in the woman you've ignored for 2 years. Danielle," his voice sounded hoarse, "for 2 years you treated me as if I were transparent, as if I didn't exist, and today, for the first time, you saw me being seen, and that bothered you." Edward closed his eyes for a moment, as if he were fighting something internal. "You're right," he finally admitted, his voice barely audible. I didn't like it. I didn't like the way that man looked at you, as if I were what? As if you were the most interesting woman in the world." The silence that followed was different from all the others they had shared. This one was loaded with possibilities, with words waiting to be said. "And you know what the most ironic part is?" Danielle asked softly. "It's that I've always been that person. I've always been smart, interesting, capable of having a fascinating conversation, but you never bothered to find out." Edward opened his eyes, and Danielle saw something in them she had never seen before. Regret, desire, fear. "You're right," he said, "and I don't know how to fix it." For the first time in 2 years, Danielle saw vulnerability in Edward. The confident, imposing CEO had given way to a confused, lost man. "Maybe you could start by trying to get to know me for real," she suggested gently. Edward took a step toward her, shortening the distance between them. "What was your maiden name?" he asked, and for the first time there was genuine curiosity in his voice. Danielle smiled, a small but real smile. "Danielle Costa, daughter of Joseph and Mary Costa, born in Fairfield, Connecticut, business administration degree from NYU. I dreamed of working for a big multinational. And what happened to that dream?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with 2 years of untold history. "Maybe," Danielle said, sliding the key card into the room next to hers. "That's a conversation for another day." She entered the room and closed the door softly behind her, leaving Edward alone in the hallway, finally beginning to understand what he had lost in 2 years of deliberate blindness. On the other side of the door, Danielle leaned against the wood and closed her eyes. For the first time in years, she felt that something was changing. The question was whether that change would come too late. Danielle woke up at 7 in the morning to the soft sound of the hotel phone. Edward's voice on the other end was different, less formal, more hesitant. "Good morning. Breakfast is served until 10. Can we have breakfast together?" She blinked a few times, making sure she wasn't dreaming. Edward Stewart was inviting her to breakfast. together, voluntarily. "Of course," she replied, trying to sound casual. "I'll see you in the restaurant in half an hour. Actually, I thought we could order it to the room. My room, if you're comfortable with that." Danielle sat up in bed, completely awake now. Something had changed drastically overnight. "Okay, I'll be there in 20 minutes. When she knocked on the door to room 1205, Danielle still didn't know what to expect, but when Edward opened the door, she almost didn't recognize him. He was barefoot, wearing a simple white t-shirt and jeans, clothes she had never seen him wear. His hair was messy and there was something different in his eyes. "Come in," he said, making way for her. The room was arranged differently. Edward had pushed the chairs toward the window that overlooked the Avenue of the Americas. The table was set for two, with tropical fruits, fresh pastries, jam, and aromatic coffee. "You arranged all this?" Danielle asked, genuinely surprised. I thought it would be better than the restaurant. More private." Edward was nervous. She could see it in his slightly trembling hands as he poured the coffee. They sat across from each other, with the golden light of the New York morning pouring through the window. For a moment, neither of them knew how to start. "Danielle," Edward finally said, "I spent all night thinking about what you said." She watched him cut a slice of papaya with excessive care, clearly searching for the courage to continue. "And you were right. About everything. I never bothered to get to know you. For 2 years I lived with a stranger and pretended that was normal." "Why?" The question came out softer than she intended. "Why did you keep me at a distance all this time?" Edward lowered his gaze. "Because it was easier. Our marriage was arranged by our parents, you know that. I thought if we didn't get emotionally involved, it would be simpler for both of us." "Simpler for whom, Edward? Do you think it was simple for me to live like a ghost in my own home?" He lowered his gaze. "No, I know it wasn't. And I'm so sorry." They were the first words of apology Danielle had heard from him in 2 years. "Last night," Edward continued, "when I saw that man talking to you, I saw how your eyes lit up. I saw how excited you were talking about things that interest you. And I realized that I had never seen you like that." "And how did that make you feel?" Edward laughed bitterly. "Jealous, with a rage I couldn't understand. And then I realized I was jealous of my own wife for being happy." Danielle felt her heart clench. There was a raw honesty in his voice she had never heard before. "I want to know you for real," he said, extending his hand across the table. "I want to know about your dreams, your frustrations, your hopes. I want to know how you take your coffee, what your favorite color is, what kind of movie makes you cry." Danielle looked at his extended hand. It was a beautiful, well-kept hand, but she could see an almost imperceptible tremor. "Why now?" she asked. "What has changed?" "I changed. Yesterday, seeing you shine in that ballroom, I realized I was wasting something precious, that I was wasting you." Danielle put her hand over his. The touch was electric, the first time they had voluntarily touched in 2 years. "Edward, you need to understand one thing. I can't just pretend the last 2 years didn't happen. You hurt me deeply by ignoring me. I know, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it up to you if you give me a chance." They remained in silence for a moment, hands intertwined, looking at each other as if they were seeing each other for the first time. "My favorite color is emerald green," Danielle finally said. "I take my coffee with brown sugar and a little cinnamon, and I cry watching movies about animals." Edward smiled, the first genuine smile she had seen from him. "What about you?" she asked. "What don't I know about Edward Stewart?" "Well," he said, squeezing her hand slightly, "I hate wearing a suit, but I have to for work. My favorite food is the grilled cheese sandwiches my grandmother used to make when I was a kid. And yesterday was the first time I ever felt real jealousy in my life." Danielle laughed, a light, genuine laugh that made Edward's heart race. "We have a lot to talk about," she said. "We have the rest of our lives for that," he replied, and for the first time in 2 years both of them believed that could be true. But neither of them could imagine that the discovery of the true reason behind their marriage was only a few months away, and that it would test this new beginning in a way they could never imagine. A month had passed since the first night of real intimacy between Danielle and Edward, and the transformation in their dynamic was remarkable. Now they shared all their meals, talked for hours about any topic, and there was a growing intimacy that neither of them had experienced before. It was a Friday night when Edward came home earlier than usual, carrying a paper bag from the French bakery that Danielle had mentioned she liked. "I brought croissants for dinner," he announced, finding her in the office working on a translation project. Danielle smiled, saving the document before getting up to greet him. It had become natural to kiss him on the cheek when he arrived, a small ritual of intimacy they had both begun to appreciate. "You're spoiling me," she said playfully. "Maybe," he admitted, wrapping his arms around her waist. "It's your fault for being so easy to please." They had dinner on the porch, watching the orange sunset over Greenwich. The conversation flowed naturally between light topics and moments of comfortable silence. "Danielle," Edward said after a while, "can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course. Have you been with someone before?" "Intimately." He blushed as he asked the question, as if he were a nervous teenager. Danielle felt the blood rush to her face. It was a question she knew would eventually come, but she wasn't prepared for the honesty it required. "No," she replied softly. "Never." Edward's eyes widened. "Never? Not even before our marriage?" "Never," she repeated. "And you know why? Because our marriage happened so fast that I never had time to have those experiences." Edward was silent for a moment, processing the information. "You mean you're a virgin? At 28, I'm a virgin." Danielle laughed without humor. "Pathetic, isn't it?" "It's not pathetic," Edward said firmly, pulling his chair closer to hers. "There is nothing pathetic about you, Danielle, nothing." He took her hands in his, kissing them softly. "What about me? Do you want to know about my past?" he asked. Danielle hesitated. Part of her wanted to know, but another part was afraid of the answer. "There were a few people," Edward continued before she could respond, "but never anything serious. Never anything that came close to what I'm feeling for you now." "And what are you feeling for me?" The question came out in a whisper. Edward stood up, pulling her with him. They stood on the porch, with the sun setting behind them, wrapped in the gentle evening breeze. "I'm falling in love with you," he said, touching her face gently. "A little more every day, and that scares and excites me at the same time." Danielle felt her eyes fill with tears. "Edward, you don't have to say anything right now. I just wanted you to know." He kissed her forehead softly. "And I want you to know too that when you're ready, if you want to, I'd like to be the first and the last." That night, they stayed up talking in bed, just talking, Danielle in a silk nightgown and Edward in pajamas. It was the first time they had shared the bed for something more than sleeping separately. "What were your parents like when you were a kid?" Danielle asked, lying on her side to look at him. "Distant," Edward admitted. "My father always traveling for business. My mother always involved in the New York high society. I grew up closer to the housekeeper, Mrs. Carmen, than to my own parents. Did that hurt? I thought it was normal until I started visiting my friends' homes and seeing real families. Families who had dinner together, who talked, who showed affection. Is that why you kept your distance from me all these years? Because you didn't know how to be close to someone?" Edward turned to her, their faces now inches apart. "Maybe, but also because I was afraid you would discover who I really am and not like me. And who are you really? Someone who never learned to love for real. Someone who is trying to figure out how to do it now, with you." Danielle reached out to touch his face. "You're doing very well." The kiss that followed was different from the previous ones. Deeper, more urgent. Edward's hands tangled in her hair as she moved closer to him. "Danielle," he murmured against her lips. "Are you sure?" She looked into his eyes, seeing vulnerability, desire, and something deeper. "I'm sure," she whispered. What happened next was a gentle discovery, full of whispered caresses and reverent touches. Edward was patient, attentive, making sure every moment was about her, about them, about the love that was growing between them. Afterward, lying intertwined, Danielle rested her head on Edward's chest, listening to his heartbeat. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For making it worth the wait." Edward kissed the top of her head, pulling her closer. "Thank you," he said, "for teaching me what it is to love for real." Neither of them knew that their declarations of love would be tested in the cruelest possible way in just a few weeks, when Danielle would discover that even this new beginning had been built on a carefully crafted lie. 2 months had passed since the first night of real intimacy between Danielle and Edward, and the transformation in their lives was remarkable. The house in Greenwich, once silent as a mausoleum, now echoed with laughter, conversations, and jazz music on Saturday mornings. Danielle was in the kitchen preparing a carrot cake, the recipe from her grandmother that she had found in a forgotten notebook, when she felt familiar arms wrapping around her waist from behind. "Smells good," Edward murmured, kissing her neck softly. "Wait until you try it," she said, turning in his arms to steal a quick kiss. It was Sunday morning, and they had created a new tradition, spending the entire weekend together, without company phones, without emails, just the two of them discovering more about each other every day. "I have a surprise for you," Edward said, with that smile she had learned to love. "What kind of surprise?" "The kind that requires you to wear comfortable clothes and be ready in an hour." An hour later, they were in Edward's convertible Mercedes, driving down the I-95 with the windows down, and The Girl from Ipanema playing on the stereo. Danielle had put on a light floral dress and her hair danced in the wind. "Where are we going?" she asked, shouting a little over the wind. "To a place I used to go when I was a kid," Edward replied. "A place where I was just a normal person, not the heir to Stuart Holdings." 30 minutes later, they stopped in front of a simple house in Fairfield, Connecticut, coincidentally, the same town where Danielle had grown up. She felt her heart clench with the familiarity of the streets. "Edward, what is this place?" "Mrs. Carmen's house, my old nanny, the only person who loved me unconditionally during my childhood." He took her hand. "I want you to meet her, Mrs." Carmen was a short, plump lady in her 60s, with warm eyes that lit up when she saw Edward. "My boy," she exclaimed, hugging him tightly. "I've been wanting to see you. Mrs. Carmen, this is Danielle, my wife." The lady's eyes widened. "Your wife? How beautiful. Come in, I'll make coffee and a grilled cheese sandwich." They spent the entire afternoon in the simple but cozy house, listening to Mrs. Carmen tell stories about Edward as a child. Danielle discovered he had been a lonely boy who found solace in his nanny's warm kitchen, far from the coldness of his parents' mansion. "He used to come here crying because his parents fought," Mrs. Carmen said, serving more coffee, "and I would make him a grilled cheese sandwich and tell him stories until he fell asleep in my lap." Danielle watched Edward blush and felt her heart fill with tenderness for this man who was allowing himself to be vulnerable with her. "Mrs. Carmen was the one who taught me what a real family is," Edward said. "That's why I wanted you to meet her." On the way home, they stopped at the city lookout. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink. "Thank you for bringing me here today," Danielle said, snuggled in his arms. "I understand a lot more about you now." "And what do you understand?" "That beneath all that armor of a successful CEO, you're just a boy who wanted to be loved." Edward was silent for a moment. "And you? Do you love me?" Danielle turned to look him in the eyes. It was the first time he had asked her the question directly. "Yes," she said simply. "I love you, Edward." The kiss they shared there, with the city of New York lighting up in the background, was full of promises and hopes. "I love you too," he whispered against her lips. "More than I ever imagined was possible." That night, they made love with a different intensity, knowing they had finally found something real and true in each other. "You know what I want?" Danielle said, lying on Edward's chest afterward. "What?" "I want to build a family. A real family full of love and affection. The opposite of how you grew up." Edward hugged her tighter. "I want that too. More than any business, more than any professional success." "Kids?" she asked timidly. "However many you want," he replied, kissing her hair. "We're going to fill this house with laughter and mess and love." Danielle smiled in the dark. For the first time in her life, the future seemed bright and full of possibilities. But neither she nor Edward could imagine that in just 2 weeks Danielle would accidentally find the documents that would reveal that even this newfound happiness had been built on a lie that went back to the very beginning of their marriage. The discovery that was about to come would not only question everything they had built, but would almost destroy the true love they had finally found in each other. It was a rainy Tuesday when Danielle went down to Edward's office looking for a stapler. He was in Albany visiting a construction site, and she had promised to finish an urgent translation project before he returned. Edward's office was a masculine sanctuary, walls lined with dark wood, a shelf full of technical books and business trophies. Danielle rarely went in there, but today the need for office supplies had made her break the unwritten rule. As she searched in the desk drawer, her fingers bumped into a leather folder that was ajar. Some papers slid to the floor. When she bent down to pick them up, a familiar word caught her eye. Costa. Her own maiden name was printed on an official document. Curious, she read the first line: Business Acquisition and Marriage Agreement, Stuart Holdings and Costa Accounting. Danielle's blood ran cold. With trembling hands, she sat in Edward's leather chair and began to read the full document. What she discovered made her feel as if the ground had disappeared from under her feet. Her marriage was part of a meticulously crafted business contract. Stuart Holdings would acquire Costa Accounting for $10 million, absorbing all of Danielle's family's debts. In exchange, she would marry Edward and remain married for a minimum of 3 years, making the necessary public appearances to maintain the company's image. There were specific clauses about behavior, residence, social appearances, and even about having children, at least one heir within the first 5 years of marriage to ensure family continuity. Danielle read the document 3 times, each word stabbing her heart like a dagger. There were signatures from everyone involved. Her father, Joseph Costa, Edward's father, Edward Stewart, Sr., and at the bottom of the last page, her own signature, next to Edward's. She remembered that day 2 years ago. Her parents had told her it was a formality, wedding paperwork. She signed, trusting their word, never imagining she was literally selling her life. An additional folder contained detailed financial reports. Costa Accounting had accumulated debts of $1.5 million due to her father's bad investments. The company was on the verge of bankruptcy when the salvation proposal appeared. Danielle even found emails between the parents of both families, discussing her as if she were a business asset. The girl is pretty and well-behaved. She'll be a good wife for our son and a good image for the company. Edward Stewart, Sr. Danielle is obedient and won't cause problems. She understands the importance of family. Joseph Costa tears began to fall as she read a particularly cruel message. Edward understands this is a business arrangement. There's no need for real emotional involvement. Maintain an appropriate distance until the company's objectives are achieved. Edward Stewart, Sr. Everything made sense now. Edward's coldness for 2 years wasn't due to shyness or a distant upbringing. They were specific instructions to maintain the marriage as a business transaction until it was convenient to change it. But then came the question that completely shattered her. And now, all this transformation, all this love, was it real? Or just the next phase of the plan? Danielle remembered Edward's words, "I'm falling in love with you." Was it true? Or had he received new instructions from his father to make the marriage more convincing? She grabbed her phone with trembling hands and called her parents. "Dad," she said when Joseph answered, "I need you to tell me the truth about my marriage." The silence on the other end of the line was confirmation enough. "Danielle, honey, I can explain." "Then explain how you sold me like livestock." Her voice came out louder than she intended. "We were ruined. We were going to lose everything. The company, the house. They could have even put me in jail for the debts." The Stewart family offered a solution that included selling your daughter. "It wasn't like that. We thought you could fall in love over time, that it would be good for both of you." Danielle hung up the phone, unable to listen to any more justifications. When Edward arrived home at 8 in the evening, excited and bringing flowers as had become his custom, he only found a note on the living room table. "I found out the truth about our marriage. I'm at the Greenwich Hotel downtown. Don't try to contact me until I'm ready to talk. Danielle." The documents she had found were scattered on the table, a silent accusation that made Edward's world instantly collapse. For the first time in his adult life, the powerful, controlled CEO sat on the floor of his living room and cried, realizing he might have lost the only thing that truly mattered, the love of the woman he had finally learned to love. The Greenwich Hotel became Danielle's refuge for the next 7 days. From the modern room on the 5th floor, she watched New York City pulse below while processing the pain of the discovered betrayal. During the first week, her phone rang non-stop. Edward called every 2 hours, leaving voicemails she couldn't bear to listen to. On the 3rd day, she finally decided to listen to one. "Danielle, please, let me explain. I know you found the contract, but that doesn't change what I feel for you now. What we have is real. I swear it's real. Please, just give me a chance to explain." His voice was hoarse, desperate in a way she had never heard before, but the pain was still too fresh for her to process if it was genuine or just another performance. On the 4th day, Edward appeared in the hotel lobby. Danielle saw him from the restaurant where she was having breakfast alone, wearing the same suit as the day before, his hair messy, an appearance that contrasted drastically with the always impeccable executive she knew. He talked to the receptionist for almost an hour, but the hotel maintained her privacy. Still, he sent flowers, yellow gerberas, with a simple note. "I'm not giving up on you. I'll never give up on us." Danielle cried as she read the note, torn between anger and longing. On the 5th day, she received an unexpected visit. Robert Miller, the college classmate she had met in New York, was in the hotel lobby. "How did you know I was here?" she asked, meeting him in the hotel cafe. "Edward looked for me. He said you were going through a difficult time and that you might need to talk to a friend." Danielle was surprised. "Edward looked for you?" "He was devastated, Danielle. He said he had lost the only thing that mattered in his life because of past lies." Robert ordered 2 coffees and sat across from her. Do you want to talk about what happened? For 2 hours, Danielle told him everything. The arranged marriage, the 2 years of loneliness, Edward's recent transformation, and finally the devastating discovery of the contract. The thing is, she said at the end, how do I know if his love is real or if it's just the new phase of the business plan? Robert was thoughtful. Can I ask you a question? How did you feel when you were with him in the last few months? Happy. For the first time in years, genuinely happy. And do you think anyone can fake the kind of intimacy you developed? The small gestures? The vulnerability he showed you? Danielle thought about all the morning coffees in the kitchen, the nights they spent talking late, the way Edward trembled when he first touched her. I don't know what to believe anymore, she admitted. On the 6th day, Danielle received an unexpected call from Mrs. Carmen. Honey, can I come see you? I have some things to tell you about my boy. An hour later, the old lady was in the hotel room holding Danielle's hands. Edward is heartbroken, she said bluntly. In 50 years that I've known him, I've never seen him cry like he has this week. Mrs. Carmen, did you know about the contract? About how our marriage started? The lady sighed deeply. I knew his father had arranged the marriage for business reasons. But I also saw my boy transform in the last few months in a way I never thought was possible. How so? Edward was always a reserved boy, who learned not to show his feelings because his parents rejected him when he tried. But since you started to get to know each other for real, he has talked about you with a light in his eyes that I had never seen. Mrs. Carmen reached into her purse and took out a photo. He gave it to me last week. It was a photo of the two of them on the porch of the house, Danielle laughing at something Edward had said. She remembered the moment, a lazy Sunday when he had tried to make a joke about his cooking skills. Look at his face in this picture, Mrs. Carmen said. Can you fake a look like that? Danielle studied the photograph. There was something in Edward's eyes that she hadn't noticed before, a genuine adoration, a pure happiness that seemed impossible to fake. But, Mrs. Carmen, how can I be sure? How do I know it's not just a sophisticated extension of the original plan? Because, the old lady said, yesterday he did something I never imagined he was capable of doing. What? He fought with his father for the first time in his life. They yelled so loud the neighbors heard. And in the end, Edward said he'd rather lose the entire company than lose you. That night, alone in the hotel room, Danielle finally listened to all the voicemails Edward had left. In the last one, recorded that morning, his voice was different. Danielle, I know you need time and I'm going to respect that, but I want you to know that I've made a decision. I'm going to undo the contract. I'll give your father's company back and cancel the entire transaction. Because if that's what I need to do to prove that my love is real, then that's what I'll do. Even if you never forgive me, even if you never come back, I want you to be free. Free from the lies, free from the obligations, free to be happy. I love you, Danielle, and that's why I'm going to set you free. For the first time in a week, Danielle felt something other than pain in her chest. It was a small but real spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, the love they had found was strong enough to survive the lies that had created it. Danielle woke up on the 7th day at the hotel with a strange feeling in her stomach. Initially, she attributed it to the stress of the week, but when the nausea persisted during breakfast, a terrifying possibility crossed her mind. At the nearest lab, she had a blood test with trembling hands. 2 hours later, looking at the result, her life changed completely once again. Positive. Approximately 6 weeks pregnant, she sat in the rental car in the lab's parking lot, holding the paper and trying to process the information. Pregnant with Edward's child, just at the moment she had discovered her marriage was a commercial farce. The tears returned, but this time they were different, not just of pain, but of fear, confusion, and an unexpected tenderness for the life growing inside her. Danielle drove aimlessly through the streets of New York, trying to decide what to do. Finally, she stopped at a cafe on 5th Avenue and called the only person she still trusted completely. Connie, can you come see me? I need to talk to someone. The housekeeper from the mansion, who had become more of a mother to Danielle over the past few years, met her at the cafe an hour later. Mrs. Danielle, what a relief to see you, Connie said, hugging her tightly. Mr. Edward he's not doing well at all. How so? He's not eating, not sleeping well. He spent the last 3 days in the office, making calls and going through papers. And yesterday, Connie hesitated. What happened yesterday? He had a very bad fight with his father. Very bad. Mr. Edward Sr. left the house yelling that he was going to disinherit his son because of a woman. Danielle showed the test result to Connie, who was instantly moved. My goodness! A baby! This is wonderful, is it? I don't know what to do, Connie. How can I have a child in the midst of all this confusion? Mrs. Danielle, can I tell you one thing I've observed all these months? Danielle nodded. Mr. Edward really changed. It wasn't an act. I saw him fall in love with you little by little without even realizing it himself at first. But what if it was just an extension of the contract? Then why is he destroying everything now? Why did he cancel the deal with your father yesterday afternoon? Danielle sat up straight in her chair. He did what? He cancelled everything. He gave your father's company back and undid the entire contract. Mr. Edward Sr. was furious. He said he would never forgive his son for throwing away $10 million because of a capricious woman. Danielle's heart raced. He really did that? Yes. And when I asked him why, he said, because I want her to know that my love is priceless, Connie, that she's worth more than any money or business. That afternoon, Danielle went home for the first time in a week. The mansion in Greenwich was silent, but she could feel Edward's presence even before she saw him. She found him in the library, sitting in the leather armchair with several documents scattered around him. He was wearing a simple t-shirt and jeans, his hair messy, an appearance she had never seen on him before. Danielle, he said, getting up quickly when he saw her. His eyes were red, as if he had been crying recently. Connie told me what you did, she said, keeping her distance but studying his face. I said I would. I undid the entire contract. Costa Accounting went back to your parents, debt-free. There's no longer a deal between our families. And what does that mean? Edward looked at her with a vulnerability that broke her heart. It means that now, if you stay with me, it will be only because you want to, not out of obligation, not because of contracts, not for money, just for love. What if I don't stay? The question clearly hurt him, but he answered with brutal honesty. Then I'll respect your decision. You're free, Danielle. Completely free to make your own choices. Danielle instinctively touched her belly, where a new life was growing, a life created during the happiest moments she had ever experienced. Edward, I need to tell you something. Anything. I'm pregnant. The silence that followed was absolute. Edward looked at her as if she had said something in a foreign language. Pregnant? He repeated, his voice barely coming out. 6 weeks. It's your child. Edward sat down heavily in the armchair, his hands on his face. For a moment, Danielle was afraid he would reject her, that the pregnancy would be an unwanted complication. But when he looked up, there were tears in his eyes. A child, he murmured. Our child. Yes. Created out of true love, not by a contract. If you want to, Danielle said softly. Edward stood up slowly, approaching her carefully, as if he was afraid she would disappear. Danielle, can you forgive me? Not just for the contract, but for all the years I wasted pretending you didn't matter when, in reality, you are everything. She studied his face, seeing sincerity, love, and genuine regret. Edward, did you really give up $10 million for me? I would give up everything for you. The whole company, the inheritance, anything. You're worth more than all of that combined. Finally, after a week of pain and confusion, Danielle felt her heart begin to heal. Maybe true love was really capable of overcoming even the most elaborate lies. Then yes, she said, approaching him. I forgive you and I love you. The kiss they shared was filled with tears, forgiveness, and the promise of a new beginning, this time built on truth and genuine love. 6 months after the reconciliation, Danielle was standing in the garden of the Greenwich mansion, looking at the simple but elegant decoration she had chosen herself. White roses and green foliage adorned a small improvised altar under the pergola where she and Edward used to have breakfast on weekends. Her 6-month belly was discreet under the cream-colored silk dress she had chosen specifically for this occasion. It wasn't a traditional wedding dress. They had already had a formal and cold ceremony almost 3 years ago. This was a dress for a new promise, a new beginning. Mrs. Danielle, you look beautiful, Connie said, adjusting a white flower in her loose hair. Mr. Edward won't be able to take his eyes off you. Danielle smiled, touching her belly where her son, they had discovered it would be a boy, was actively moving. Do you think we're doing the right thing, Connie? Renewing our vows like this? I think you're doing what your heart tells you, and after everything you've been through, you deserve to celebrate the true love you found. There were only 20 people present. Danielle's parents, with whom she had reconciled after months of family therapy, Mrs. Carmen, some close friends and employees who had become part of the family. Significantly, Edward's parents were not present. Edward Stewart, Sr., still had not forgiven his son for throwing away a multi-million-dollar business because of feelings. When the soft guitar music began to play, Danielle walked slowly through the garden she had helped redesign, transforming it from something formal and cold into a cozy and lively space. Edward was waiting for her near the altar, wearing a simple navy blue suit without the ostentation of corporate events. When their eyes met, he smiled with a tenderness that made her remember why she had fallen in love with him. The officiant, a pastor friend of the Costa family, opened the ceremony with simple words. "We are here today not to unite two strangers, but to celebrate the true love that blossomed between two people who found each other in the midst of confusion and chose to build something real and lasting." Edward was the first to speak, holding Danielle's hands. "Danielle, 3 years ago, I married you without knowing you. Today I choose you knowing every flaw, every quality, every dream you have. I choose you pregnant with our child, radiant and brave. I choose you on the difficult days and on the happy days. I promise I will never again pretend you don't matter, because you are everything." Danielle wiped away tears before responding. "Edward, you taught me that true love can grow even in the most unexpected places, that two people can find each other even after years of living as strangers. I promise to love you for the man you are today, not for what circumstances forced us to be. I promise to build a family full of love with you." When they exchanged the rings, new and simple, chosen together in a small jewelry store downtown, they were both crying. "You may kiss the bride," the pastor said, "to officially begin this new journey." The kiss was soft, filled with promises and hope. When they separated, the baby gave a strong kick, which made them both laugh. "I think he approved," Edward said, putting his hand on Danielle's belly. The party was simple, a barbecue in the garden, live music played by a guitar trio, and conversations that extended until sunset. Danielle watched Edward conversing animatedly with her father, Joseph Costa, about plans to expand Costa Accounting, now that it was debt-free and had real support. "How does it feel, Mrs. Stewart?" Robert Miller asked, who had become a dear friend of the couple. "Like Danielle," she corrected with a smile. "I feel like I'm finally myself." Later, when the last guests left, Danielle and Edward sat on the porch, watching the stars. The mansion was no longer a silent mausoleum. It was a home full of life and hope. "Do you regret it?" Edward asked, stroking her belly. "Giving me a second chance?" "Never," Danielle replied. "But do you regret undoing the deal? You lost a lot of money because of me." Edward laughed. "I gained a wife who truly loves me, a child on the way and a life worth living. How can I regret the best deal I've ever made?" That night, they made love as husband and wife for the first time, not as strangers fulfilling obligations, not as people learning to know each other, but as a couple who had chosen to be together against all odds. "I love you, Edward," Danielle whispered in the dark. "I love you more," he replied, kissing her forehead. "You saved me from an empty life. You saved me from myself. We saved each other." And for the first time since they had met, they both fell asleep, completely happy and at peace, knowing that they had finally found the true love that had been worth all the pain and confusion of the previous years. The office of Stewart and Costa International Consulting occupied an entire floor of a modern building on Park Avenue. Through the glass windows, you could see the frantic movement of the New York Financial Center, but inside the space there was a different energy. Professional, yes, but also cozy and familiar. Danielle was in her office, reviewing a consulting contract for a German company that wanted to invest in renewable energy in the US, when she heard familiar laughter coming from the next room. She smiled, knowing that Edward was playing with Joseph Edward Stewart, their 4-month-old son who had inherited his father's almond-shaped eyes and his mother's mischievous smile. "Is Dad trying to make you laugh during a meeting again?" she asked, entering Edward's office with the baby in her arms. "He's irresistible," Edward defended himself, taking their son into his arms with the naturalness of someone who had fallen head over heels in love with fatherhood. "And our meeting is over anyway." Klaus Weber, the German investor they had met in New York 2 years before, laughed at the family scene. "You're exactly as I imagined you would become," he said in English, "a real family building real businesses." "And what about the Hamptons Resort project?" Danielle asked, organizing some papers on the desk. "Thanks to your consulting, it's being one of the most successful investments we've made in the US. You understood exactly what we needed." After Klaus left, Danielle sat in the armchair across from Edward's desk, breastfeeding Joseph Edward while they talked about the company's projects. "You know what impresses me the most," she said, "how our company grew so fast." "It's because we complement each other perfectly," Edward replied, watching her with admiration. You have the international knowledge and cultural sensitivity. I have the experience in construction and development. Together, we are unbeatable. In the last 12 months, Stewart & Costa had become one of the most respected consulting firms in New York. They specialized in helping foreign companies invest in the US and American companies expand internationally. What had started as a way for Danielle to resume her career had turned into a multi-million-dollar business. "I have a surprise for you," Edward said, taking an envelope from the drawer. "What kind of surprise?" "The kind that takes us abroad for 2 weeks." Danielle opened the envelope and found 3 tickets, 2 for adults and a special one for a baby. "Italy?" she asked incredulously. "A belated honeymoon, the one we never had." Edward stood up and approached her. "I want to show you Rome, Venice, Tuscany. I want Joseph Edward to have his first international trip. I want to create real memories with my family." Joseph Edward chose this moment to give a toothless smile that melted his parents' hearts. "He approved," Danielle said, laughing. That night, at home, the same mansion in Greenwich that was now full of life, with toys scattered, constant laughter, and the smell of homemade food, they had dinner in the kitchen as they had become accustomed to. "You know what I received today?" Edward said, showing her an elegant letter. "What is it?" "A wedding invitation from my parents." Danielle almost choked on her wine. "Your parents are getting married? Again?" "Apparently, after seeing us truly happy, they decided to try couples therapy. They discovered they had never really known each other in 40 years of marriage. That's unexpected. My father also wants to talk to me about doing business together again, but this time as real partners, not as boss and employee." Danielle took his hand. "And what do you want to do?" "I want to think about it, but with you by my side. All the important decisions in my life now include you." After putting Joseph Edward in the crib, a simple crib that Edward had personally assembled, rejecting the expensive options his mother had suggested, they went to the bedroom. "1 year," Danielle said, lying on Edward's chest. "1 year since we renewed our vows." "The best year of my life," he replied, kissing her hair. "What about you? Do you regret anything?" Danielle thought for a moment. In 12 months she had become a mother, a successful businesswoman, and a person more in love with her husband than she ever imagined was possible. She had rebuilt her relationship with her parents, built a prosperous company, and created a true family. "I don't regret anything," she finally said, "not even the 2 difficult years at the beginning." "Why not?" "Because they made us value what we have now. If it had been easy from the start, maybe we never would have learned to fight for our love." Edward hugged her tighter. "You made me a better man, Danielle. You taught me that true love is worth any sacrifice. And you taught me that it's never too late to start over, that 2 people can find each other even in the midst of confusion." From the next room came a soft wail. Joseph Edward woke up for his midnight feeding. "I'll go," Edward said, getting up. "We'll go," Danielle corrected. "Together, remember?" As they took care of their son in the middle of the night, Danielle looked around the baby's room that they had decorated together, with soft colors, simple furniture but full of love, family photos scattered on the shelves, and she knew she had found what she had always been looking for. Not just a husband, but a life partner. Not just a house, but a home. Not just a marriage, but a family built on true love and conscious decisions. "You know what I want to do tomorrow?" she asked, as Joseph Edward fell back asleep. "What?" "I want to call that young couple we met yesterday, the ones who are thinking of getting married just for financial convenience, and tell them what? That true love is worth waiting for, but that sometimes it can grow in the most unexpected places." Edward smiled, understanding perfectly. "Can our story help other people?" "Our story," Danielle said, returning to bed next to the man she had learned to love against all odds, "is proof that it's never too late to choose true love." And when the sun rose over Greenwich that morning, illuminating a family that had transformed an arranged marriage into the most beautiful love story they had ever lived, Danielle knew that all the difficult moments, all the tears, and all the pain had been worth it. Because in the end, they not only found love, but they chose to build it day after day with patience, forgiveness, and the courage to be vulnerable with each other.